Welcome to our PCI DSS webinar today. Today we will discuss the impacts of PCI DSS version 4.0 on a point of sale environment, so the place where customers purchase goods with the merchants. Who am I? My name is Julia Mingert and I'm an auditor with USDG since 4 years now. I help my customers, mostly merchants, to reach their PCI DSS environment locally and also in a global context, so over a few more countries. Before I was working with USD, I worked with a German merchant in a POS environment, so I'm quite familiar with the procedures which you might have in your organization. Before we start with the presentation itself, let's talk about housekeeping for the webinar. So you don't need to take any notes during the presentation. The presentation, as you see today, will be provided to you tomorrow morning. So in case that you have anything you want to look at, you can just open the presentation further. We are recording this webinar today. So if you hear anything verbally, you also don't need to write it down. You can just listen to it over and over again as many times as you need. Let's get started. First of all, we talk about PCI DSS at a glance. So what kind of changes did we have in PCI DSS in general, the timeline which we will face with the new version, so what kind of steps do we need to take next. And then we will look at a few requirements which are new to our merchant environment. In the end, I will give you a general summary of the changes PCI DSS version 4.0 had on our merchant environment. During the presentation today, during the webinar, we will not go into detail with all changes which occurred in PCI version 4.0. So if you have more general interest in PCI version 4.0, those topics like customized first-defined approach, or how did reporting change, how the standard itself in general changed, then you can watch our webinar from the 12th of May called Let's Get Started. For any topics which you might have for your e-commerce environment, so where customers can purchase goods on your website. We had a wonderful webinar from a colleague of mine who presented all changes and new requirements for this. You find it also in YouTube, and you can watch to this webinar as well if you missed it. PCI DSS 4.0 at a glance. So what steps do we need to take next? So PCI DSS version 4.0 was published this March 2022. So since March, we know about the changes, we know about the changes in detail. Since June, this June, we can, as QSAs, take a training, just so-called transition training, which allows us to certify organizations according to PCI version 4.0. Before a QSA can certify you according to PCI 4.0, they definitely have to take this training. So make sure if you decide to have an on-site training, not fill out the SAQ by itself, that you either ask or look it up on the PCI SSC website, PCI Security Council's website, if your QSA or a QSA already performed this transition training. Also, since June this year, we have supporting documentation as an example, the SAQs, which give us guidance on what kind of requirements apply for different SAQ environments, for different merchant environments. The PCI DSS standard for version 4.0 can be applied right now from the beginning on, but it doesn't have to. So it means currently, you still can be certified according to version 3.0.1. This is possible until the 31st of March 2024. Starting from the 1st April 2024, you definitely have to get certified according to version 4.0. But until then, you can choose. Do you want to stay with the old version, or do you already want to transition to the new version? Then we see here in the end the last date for the future dated requirements. This means we have some requirements which do not apply right from the beginning on, but where you have some additional time to implement those changes in your environment. The timeline for this is the 31st of March. So until the 31st of March, you can choose either if you want to apply those requirements, if you want to follow those requirements or not. Beginning from the 1st of April 2025, you have to implement those future dated requirements in order to be certified according to the PCI DSS version 4.0. What kind of change types do we have in PCI DSS version 4.0? So we looked at the PCI version 4.0 and we realized that there are different kinds of changes. So first of all, we have some changes, some requirements which were updated within the wording and the definition in order to give more guidance to the QSAs and to the organizations getting certified on how requirements have to be understood. So there were, as an example, some disputes. It was cleared to make sure that everyone follows the same approach. Further, we had some requirements which were updated to ensure that we apply our standard to the changed flag situation in our environment. So since the technical environment always changes and that there are things which we consider secure 5 years ago are not secure anymore, the standard ensures that it is up to date and it provides you the most possibility to be secure. Further, we had some structure change in the standard, which means that either requirements were moved in the standard itself from, for example, to the end, or that requirements were merged together, where there were repetitions in the requirements, or some requirements were divided into the different sub-requirements to ensure understanding of the requirements to make them more clear. So the basis for our webinar today are the self-assessment questionnaires. Self-assessment questionnaires, so-called SAQs, have to be just as the on-site audits completed once a year. We have different types of questionnaires. We have 4 versions. We have the A, the AP, mostly used for e-commerce environments. We have the B, VIP, C, CTV, CVT, and P2PE, used for merchant environments with brick and mortar stores, so where customers goes into the store, purchase goods, and with this credit card. And then the C and CVT can also be used to in environments where the customer, as an example, calls by phone and purchase goods by phone, and then the credit card number is typed in manually. The SAQD includes all full PCI DSS requirements, so it applies when no other SAQ can be used. SAQs can be either completed manually, so you can go to the PCI Security Standards Council website and download the SAQ, follow the SAQ, and fill out spaces by hand. So if you do it by yourself without an auditor, or you can use the PCI DSS platforms of the acquirers. Those are mostly recommended also to people, organizations which might need more guidance with their PCI DSS certification, and we highly recommend to use them because this completion of the SAQ on the platform is guided, so there you have some more explanations what requirements need, and if you check a specific requirement, what kind of software requirements apply or do not apply, and they help you to avoid formal errors in general. SAQs can not only be used to provide organizations the opportunity to self-assess themselves, but also they help AQSAs to scope your environment and to ensure that they check for the right requirements applying to your environment, depending on some preconditions. The preconditions for your SAQ are defined in the SAQ document itself. You can find them in a chapter before you begin. And just when you decide to fill out an SAQ, to follow SAQ guidance, then it's really important that you read this chapter before you begin at the beginning of your SAQ, because we have the preconditions which are determined, which define shortened SAQ you can follow. That we have some requirements like network segmentation, the fact that you do not store or process credit card data, that you might need some BTS certification or some P2PE certification, and so on. But let's go into detail in the SAQs which we have specifically in the merchant environment. So first, we look at the SAQ-B. So we can see we have here only 26 requirements applying, around 26. The exact number depends on how you count. So we got 26. This applies when you use input machines or if your payment terminal is connected via phone line. The SAQ-BIP applies when your payment terminal is either connected via P connection and is PTS certified. So you definitely, when you want to follow the SAQ-BIP, have to check that your payment terminal is PTS certified. If your payment terminal is PTS certified or not, you can look this up also on the website of the PCI DSS. There you have listed all currently certified PTS terminals and on how long they are certified, because PTI certifications do not last forever. Further, we have the SAQ B2PE. The B2PE SAQ applies when you use a P2PE certified solution offered by your acquirer. So the acquirer here has to receive a specific audit where they are certified for this P2PE solution. Here we have only 21 requirements applying. So why do we have only 21 requirements? Because all the technical requirements we had earlier, they are left out from this audit, as the connection is certified or encrypted from the payment terminal right to your acquirer. So we make sure that the whole connection is point-to-point encrypted. Then we also have some more options, C for D and C. The SAQ C for D applies when you manually put in credit card data into your web browser. So there is a solution which you open via the web browser, it is certified, and then you manually type in the credit card number from your customer. Further, we have the SAQ-C. This applies when you have a payment terminal which is connected via the internet, or you use a payment application system which is connected via internet. Last but not least, the SAQ-D for merchants. The SAQ-D for merchants, we remember, always applies if we cannot follow any of the previously shown SAQs. So if we do not fulfill any of the preconditions we talked earlier about network segmentation and so on, which you can read up in the beginning of the SAQ, there's a description what kind of preconditions you need. If you cannot follow them. If your environment doesn't fit into one of those presented channels, then you have to follow the SAQD. So what kind of requirements do we face with the version PCI 4.0? In general, we have 74 new requirements which are some of our future dated. From the 74, we have 12 requirements which apply only for service providers and 62 requirements which apply for merchants and service providers. Further from those 74, we have only 22 which are valid starting from the 1st of April, or if you get certified according to PCI version 4.0, and 52 are only valid from the 1st of April 2025. So if you cannot follow them right away, do not worry, you have some more time. But it's not like those 74 requirements apply to our SAQs. If we remember, if we looked at the SAQ P2P as an example, we had only, I think, 21 requirements in total. So if you look at the table below, you see that we had some ideas on how many requirements really are new to the environment. You will see during the presentation that we anyway have written down some requirements which have changed, and written down that they might apply to SAQ VIP, B, and P2P, and so on. But it doesn't mean that they are really new. It might happen that they're only that they clarify, that they're clarifications, or that they're adjustments a little bit. During our presentation, we will only look at the first 4 SAQs. So the SAQ C will not be included in this webinar. It has a little bit too many requirements to be covered in 1 hour. So some of the requirements which also apply to the SAQC, they are written down here, but there are a few more which apply to SAQC. So we will not be able to talk about them today. If you have any question, if this payment channel applies to you, please feel free to contact us and we'll be happy to support you. Then let's start with the first requirement. 1.5.1 applies to SAQ C4T, trusted and untrusted networks. This requirement is mostly clarification. So it clarifies that security controls do not only need to be applied to network devices, but to all computing devices in your network environment, in your CDE. And this also definitely includes administrator notebooks and workstations. Requirement 3.2.1. This is one of the requirements I talked about earlier. So here we have SAQB, VIP, P2P listed. So it is a change. There is a change in this requirement, but it is not really a new change to us. And even though this requirement is stated as future dated, if we look at it in detail, we see there is applicability note. So this note describes that this requirement only applies if you have any credit card data printed on paper and stored as paper, which I in general do not recommend. So if you use payment terminals, please deactivate the option to print any full credit card data. So if you have truncated some of the part, it's not full credit card data, but only full credit card data apply here. Please deactivate this function. You definitely do not need the whole credit card data. If you have any issues with specific payments, it is enough for the acquirer to know the TID, so the number specified for your cash register, the amount which was paid, maybe the card type, and the date and time. You don't need the whole credit card to follow specific payments. I hope that helped. So next one is the requirement 5.3.1 anti-malware mechanisms. So if we look at the standard 3.2.1, we see that here we had a wording change. So previously it was called antivirus mechanisms. And previously those the solution, antivirus solutions are just were required to be kept current. But now we have to make sure that those anti-malware solutions are kept current through automatic updates. So it's not enough here to do manual updates. And the purpose here is that the anti-malware solution you have installed is always updated and on a timely manner, and you don't forget any important updates. So next requirement, 5.3.3, also applies to SAQC and SAQC 14. Also is an anti-malware mechanism requirement, which applies to removable electronic media. What is a removable electronic medium? Examples are USB sticks or any other chips where you can put information and store it electronically. Why do we have a requirement asking for this? So the standard, the council realized after some time that USB stick or this removable electronic media just are a threat to your environment, because sometimes you receive an USB stick during, let's say, a convention with information from another organization, but you don't always know if this organization is really trustworthy or not, or you find a USB stick, and even though your workers should not just insert any unknown USB stick, it happens. And to just reduce the threat posed from this electronic media, they ask you to scan them automatically in the moment they are inserted. This is also a future dated requirement, so until the 31st of March, you don't have to follow it if you want to be certified according to the new version on the 1st of April 2025. You definitely have to implement the solution. Requirement 5.4.1 also applies only to SAQC and C14. This requirement asks you to have technical measures against phishing attacks. Let's look at the requirement. So this requirement is also future dated, so you have some more time. What do you need to do here is that you have technical controls which make sure or which ensure that when a person receives a phishing attack or a phishing email or something like that, that it is validated technically and that it might not even reach your employees. How do we implement this? So we can do this example of anti-spoofing control, with domain-based message authentication, reporting and conference, standard policy frameworks, and domain key identified mails. Those are all solutions which are installed in the mail server itself. But it is not the goal of the PCI version 4.0 that the mail server becomes part of the certification. It is more that if you look at applicability notes, it is defined that during the audit, we will only look up if this solution is installed, this application is installed on a mail server, but we will not look at the mail server in full during the audit. So you don't have to worry that this is becoming part of the certification. 8.2.2, applying to SAQC, CVT, and VIP, covering emergency accounts, or as it's stated here, group, shared, or generic accounts. If remember the last standard, version 3.2.1, group, shared, or generic accounts were forbidden from use. So why do we apply this? Why do we have this requirement here? Is because this is not always possible. So it is clear that each administrator should have their own account in order to make them accountable of all the actions they take on the servers or the network devices. But there's some emergency situations where you need to have some kind of emergency account, some kind of account. If something happens, everyone can have access to. As an example, if remote authentication is not working, or if your Active Directory, your LDAP is not working, that you still can have access to your systems. That is why the new standard saw this problem, that there are sometimes reasons why you need to have emergency accounts. If you had an audit of PCI, we always already handled emergency accounts this way, but the standard wanted to make sure to legalize this approach of emergency accounts and define some specific rules which have to be followed if you have them. So first of all, emergency accounts, group shared or generic accounts for this emergency use, can only be used when you have an exceptional circumstance. We talked about if you cannot reach your system otherwise. If it can only be used during the time needed. So in the moment your emergency is ended, in the moment you have access to ESA, to an Active Directory again, then you should stop using this emergency account and go back to your normal identified user account. You need a written down business justification for your emergency account, which is explicitly approved by management. So they have to know about this account and they need to say, yes, you can use it in this kind of situations. And further, even though this is a shared account, we still need to ensure that we can see who used this account at which time. So we still need to make sure, we need to implement some procedures which ensure that we can define which user logged in with this account, which user took which action. Example is that you have your password stored in a key pass, and the moment you access this password, there is an alert generated which states user AB access password at this time. And after using this, you should need to make sure to change the password to ensure that this user who accessed this emergency user didn't have the chances to remember it and can access with this emergency account to another time. Password requirement, password complexity, requirement 8.3.6, applying to SAQC and CVT only. Remember, for SAQB, VIP, and P2P, we never had any password complexity requirements so far. What's the change? So it is a change of the length of the characters. So we enhanced the length to 12 characters. Exceptional if your system cannot use 12 characters, then you can reduce it to 8 characters. This requirement is also feature dated, so you can just go with your solution. If you want to be certified right now according to 4.0, you can just go with the solution you have right now with the number of characters in your password and implement this requirement until the 31st of March 2025. So beginning from the 1st of April 2025, you need to implement this requirement. Another requirement which applies for SAQC and VIP, requirement 8.4.3, covering multi-factor authentication. So this requirement defines that we need to have MFA access from all remote network access, so from on-site entities network, which could access or impact the CDE. This means for all persons, so users and administrators, not only, I think currently often it is misunderstood for only administrators applying, but also for users and for all third parties and vendors, so for your service providers and also those which let's say, support you in troubleshooting or support you in installing any kind of patches. All of them need multi-factor authentication, even if they can have only read-only access. And this was also applied because often it was also understood that application access to applications doesn't need any MFA access. Next requirement, media storage on requirement 9.4.1.1, basically applying to all SAQs. If we remember earlier from applicability notes, for the SAQs, we cannot store any credit card data electronically. So what is the media we talk about in this requirement, which has to be reviewed every 12 months? It is basically all the paper media we have, so all the paper receipts, all the paper pages we have where full pen is printed on. I still and will always recommend for you not to print your full pen on paper. You don't need it. If you need it, rethink if you really need it. And but still, this requirement, it is more of a clarification because even earlier we needed, according to requirement 9.8 and version 3.2.1, it is required that you keep your media only as long as it is needed, and as soon as it is no longer needed by legal or internal reasons, that you delete and destruct those paper media. So in order to do this, you need to at least once a year look at your media and check which ones are no longer needed, which life cycle is already over. We talked about media destruction. Requirement 9.4.06. This also applies to any hard copy materials. So any kind of media so any kind of paper where you have printed your full pen on. This requirement is a clarification describing again how to ensure that your media is destroyed if it is no longer needed for business or legal reasons, and that if you store it in beforehand, then it should be in secure storage containers. But it's not really new, but it is the wording and the style of this requirement has changed a little bit. Requirement 9.5.1.2.1, PoE device inspection, also applying to all of our SAQs in our mentioned environment. So this requirement specifically talks about the temper check of our terminal. So it is right now in the current version 3.2.1 asks that you check your terminals in a periodic matter for any kind of tampering, that you train your employees in the stores to check the terminals. But here we have also that this is included in your the frequency of the periodic activity has to be defined according to your risk. So how many customers do you have? Is this terminal attended? Is it unattended? Do you have maybe some other measures like video recording, the CCTV, which checks for any person going to a terminal, or how many cashiers do we have? Is this the cashier always with the terminal, and so on? So you should take this into account, and just based on this, decide on how often you need to check your devices. We are almost finished with the new requirements. Requirement 12.6.3.1, security awareness. This requirement also applies to all of our SAQs. Security awareness training was always already asked for in our SAQs, so we always needed to train our employees on the topic of security awareness. Change here is that we explicitly added the phishing and related attacks as well as social engineering. By the way, this is also a completed requirement. So if your security awareness training does not cover phishing and social engineering topics, depending on if it is like face-to-face training or if it is a web-based training, it's not a game changer for you, so you don't need to apply this requirement right away to be certified according to version 4.0, but you can take your time to think about how you want to implement this to adjust your security awareness training material. And then beginning from the 1st of April 2025, this requirement will be needed to be certified. But why do we need this specification, adding phishing and related attacks and social engineering? We earlier saw that we need sometimes to include technical controls which are implemented on the web server, not a web server, but the email server, to ensure that the frequency in which internal personnel sees any kind of phishing emails or maybe meets social engineering attacks reduces. But as we see, the social engineering attacks, they're getting better and better, and it's even more difficult. It takes more knowledge, more awareness to realize that you're being attacked, that you're currently the goal of someone who wants to reach information, to get information from you. And even for people who think that they know, that they're knowledgeable about, that they're trained, it might be happen that during the situation themselves, they are so pressured, or this attack is in, they receive an email and think, oh great, I know this person. We do this kind of procedures in our company sometimes. It might happen that they do not take all steps necessary, and for some kind of attacks. As a good example, it's always good to have some kind of phishing simulation in your company. Try it out. See how many people will actually click on an email coming from an internal source or believing it is an internal source. And sometimes it even helps people if they see that they can really be the target, that they are relevant, how fast it happens, that they oversee some critical points in the phishing or social engineering attacks, for them to wake up and realize, okay, I need to be aware of this and I definitely need to follow the steps. That's the reason why we have this added parts in this requirement. So that's already it for the changes for most common payment channels. Remember, the SAQ-C was not included in this overview. It would have been a little bit too much. We saw that already had some more slides for the other SAQs. If you need guidance on the SAQ-C, contact us. We will definitely help you, we support you. And the SAQ-C will be included in the handout you will see later on, but we just didn't talk about it today. So let's look at the timeline. You had this webinar today. What should you expect now? So you can start, if you wish to, with your PCI version 4.0 certificate. From now on, you have to make sure that your QSA is definitely trained, that they fulfill this transition training. And even if you are a merchant which follows an SAQ-B, BIP, or P2E solution SAQ, then please make sure to recheck the requirements. I just presented to you that you implemented them just the way I explained it, because even though we follow this, even though it was clear for us that the requirements have to be followed like that, it might happen that you might have to adjust one or two procedures. Starting from the 1st of April in 2024, you will be able to be certified only according to PCI 4.0. So on the 31st of March is the last date you can sign PCI DSS SAQ according to this current version 3.2.1. The future date requirements, here called new requirements, will be applicable starting from the 1st of April 2025. So you here have even more time to implement them. But even though it seems to be a lot of time, and even though you might think there are not a lot of changes and they might not impact me too much, please ensure that you sit down, look at the requirements and recheck that they are implemented correctly in your environment. If not, take the time and implement them. In general, for the SAQs, the prerequisites, so the preconditions to follow those SAQs didn't really change a lot. They stayed mostly the same. We talked about it earlier. If you look at the SAQ, if you download it, look at the beginning, read through the first chapters and check if you really follow all of the preconditions. Then the most important and biggest changes in those SAQ types, they are mostly to be found in CVT and C. Here only showing CVT because this is the topic of this webinar. It is the automatic anti malware updates to ensure that you don't update them anymore manually. It is the automatic solutions for anti-phishing. So we remember the slide we had earlier, the solutions you could install on your mail server to ensure that your employees receive less malware. And then, last but not least, password complexity, even though it doesn't seem to be a big of change. So please recheck your systems and make sure that they can follow the new requirements on password complexity, that you can make password long enough, because not all systems, even currently used, can do so. I hope the webinar helped you and I could cover the most important or the most questions you have. And now please feel free to address any questions you might have. Okay, it seems like there are no more questions. So in case that you have any questions or any topics you want to discuss after the webinar, if you remember anything later on, please feel free to contact us. We will be happy to support you. And thanks again for your attention, for attending this webinar today. It was a pleasure to see you. Thank you.